Hello, Rose. And Teresa? Okay. Hey, everybody. It's me, Father Scott, your pastor. It's Friday. Happy Friday to you all. I, like you, probably am wishing the sun was out. The one good thing about that is that I don't have it blasting in my eyes right now. So that's nice, but besides that, I'm ready for spring. It's coming. It is 23 days away. All right. Going through the vices. We've done 4. We're number 5. We have 2 more. I could work in a donut shop. Okay, so what are we going through today? Today we are doing sloth or sloth. Okay? It can be said either way according to Webster. So, and remember, we're using this Back to Virtue by Peter Kreeft. So if you want to save time, save brain cells, you can jump to this and not listen to me. But what's our first thought? What's the first thing that comes to your head when I say sloth? Not the 3-toed animal. Like, what comes to mind? Usually, probably for many of you, it's laziness, right? But they're not the same thing. It's not the same thing. St. Thomas Aquinas gives us a definition. Sorrow about spiritual good. Not finding joy when it's made clear to us that God is our ultimate joy. It's not finding joy in God. It's a lack of want for God, basically. It's in opposition to charity. Charity is love for God and love for others. So it can be a mortal sin. And I admit that I have this sometimes, and I don't admit it as much as I should, and therefore I don't confess it as much as I should. So why is it in opposition, or why is it a mortal sin? Because it deadens our yearning for God. And what is a mortal sin? It's something that cuts us off from God. It breaks completely our relationship with the Lord and removes us from the state of grace. So, if we're not yearning for God, if we don't desire to have a relationship with God, probably not going to have much of a relationship. So it makes sense that it would be a mortal sin, because it's essentially breaking our relationship by removing our desire to be with Him. So again, it's not the same as laziness, but they are related. Laziness is a lack of desire for what needs to be done that leads to us not doing it. That's not a technical definition, but it's my definition. So there's a lack of desire for what needs to be done that leads to us not doing it. When I'm sitting in my room in the rectory, and I look around and I see the stuff that's not where it belongs, see things that are dusty or dirty that need to get cleaned, I know they need to happen, but I lack the desire to do them, and so they don't get done. That's me being lazy. Sloth is a lack of desire for God and the things of God, and that leads to us not seeking Him. So they are related, but they're not the same. Okay. Pascal, a great philosopher, said that there are three kinds of people when it comes to this. There are those who seek God and have found him. There are those who seek God and have not found him. There are those who do not seek God and therefore do not find him. And he said, the first group that seek God and find him, they are reasonable and joyful. The second group that seek God but have not found him are reasonable but joyless. And the third group, they don't seek God, they don't find him, are unreasonable and joyless. Those top two, we want to be one of those two. Because the second category eventually becomes the first. Remember yesterday's gospel? I mean, it's amazing that the Holy Spirit overlays this stuff, right? What was yesterday's gospel? Those who ask find an answer. Those who seek find. Those who knock, the door is open to them. If we are seeking God and we found him, we are reasonable and we have joy. If we're seeking God and we not found him, we're reasonable, we don't have joy, but we're going to, because he says, if you seek, if you knock, you will find. It will be opened to you. You will find that joy because you will find God. The problem is when we stop asking, we stop seeking, we stop knocking. Not that it has to be exhausting. God's not trying to wear us out looking for him. But we just have to make sure that we never lose the desire for him. We lose the desire for God and the things of God, we've fallen into sloth. And it could lead to mortal sin. And it's actually worse than rebelling against God. For someone to know that there is a God, to be in tune, to even be Catholic, but to just be like, that's actually worse than someone who's like, forget you, God, I'm going to do what I want. But they do it with some gusto. A really bad sinner could become one of God's greatest allies with just some redirection. I'm going headlong, I'm full steam ahead on my sin. But I've got some oomph behind me. I've got some fire within me. All God has to do is go, and that person can easily become a saint. Think of St. Augustine. Think of St. Paul, right? These guys had gusto in their sin. They just had to be redirected. But if we're like, if we're extremely tepid, which I know sounds like a contradiction, but if we're just like extremely in the middle and be like, ugh, we have to be more than redirected. We also have to be fired up. Sloth is a very dangerous thing. Now, resting is not sloth. It's part of a balanced life. To not be slothful does not mean going frenetically without end. And this is one of the things, I mean, as I was preparing for this today, this is one that kind of hits me to heart, because I'm one of those who sometimes I like to think that I'm growing in holiness because I'm just going 150 miles an hour. That's not necessarily holy. Going frenetically without end is not the opposite of sloth. Busyness, being busy, that is not balanced, probably means that we are actually running from the ache for God that we should have, but we are ignoring. Busyness that's not balanced probably means that we are running from the ache for God that we should have, but we are ignoring. Right? Sometimes even in ministry, We can so busy ourselves that we actually aren't seeking and following and loving and finding joy in God. It's pretty dangerous. And yet, Kreeft starts off this chapter just like talking about, how this particular sin is a huge one for our society. Even though our society goes 100 miles an hour, in fact, probably because it goes 100 miles an hour, because it's going 100 miles an hour, and yet we are bored. Last year when the pandemic first caused schools to kind of go remote, and our school did an amazing job, our teachers did an amazing job pivoting to being remote. But it was not the same as being in class, and everybody recognizes that. But for the 8th graders, we took them and we put them in small groups. And we had different teachers who cared, or myself and maybe Deacon Tom or whatever, Father Justin. Take some of these small groups and just check in with them. And I would talk to my guys and I'd be like, what are you doing with your time? And they're like, we're playing video games. Are you bored? Yes, out of our minds. I mean, they have video games that could occupy them for countless hours. But they're bored. And it's not just them. We all have this. We have what seems to be an infinite number of things that could dispel our boredom. Movies, TV shows, Netflix, video games, social media, news. I mean, we can't reach the edge of all the things that we could be doing, and yet we're bored out of our minds. God is the only thing that doesn't get boring. And yet, and I talked about this when I was talking about the Eucharistic prayers, right? I talked about how, we might think, okay, heaven is just gazing upon the goodness of God, gazing upon the face of God. Isn't that going to get boring? No, because God's the only one who is infinite and therefore won't eventually become boring. Trust me, and I'm saying this to myself too. Trust me. Gazing upon God in heaven will not be boring. But I get bored at Mass. Okay. It's probably because we're not really putting ourselves into it. And is it hard to see God at Mass? Sure. It's going to be harder. It's going to be easier to see God when we're gazing upon him in heaven than in Mass. But if we really opened our spiritual eyes, we're going to see him at Mass. And Mass will not be boring. If we come to put ourselves into praising and worshiping God at Mass, we're not going to get bored. If we come open to what he wants to teach us at Mass, we're not going to be bored. We enter into heaven with all those things. We're not going to be bored. But when we think okay, heaven's just going to be me staring at God or something. Whereas here on earth, I've got all these different things that I could be focused on and looking at and doing. But all of it cannot fill that God-sized hole in our heart. So we will be busy, but we will be bored. Having sloth is lacking a passion for the things of God. And I mean, sometimes I think I'd rather interact with a passionate Buddhist or a passionate Muslim or even maybe a passionate atheist than an unmotivated Christian. Now, which of those is closer to God? I mean, probably the unmotivated Christian, but the unmotivated Christian, it might be harder to get them fired up than to redirect a passionate person who's not a Christian. We need passion, not necessarily busyness, and not necessarily stuff and things to occupy our mind. We need God, but we got to search for him. And so the opposite of sloth is seeking. And when I get into the Beatitudes and talk about how they counteract the vices, the one that we're going to be talking about for this is those who search for righteousness and search for God. Ask, seek, knock. Don't become slothful. Okay, it's Friday. I'm going to let you off early. Enjoy your extra 4 or 5 minutes of your weekend. Hope it's good. We have live stations at 6. You can do them in person or online. I'll be back with you tonight at 8 o'clock for the Rosary. I'm going to try this time to make sure I've got enough power so that my phone doesn't mess us up. And tomorrow we got Mass in the morning, confessions at 3:30, Mass at 5. And then, you know the routine. It's all good. Oh, but Sunday evening, 6:30, community adoration. Join us for that. Have a good week.